In our last episodes, we talked about the philosophical roots of psychology with Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. And we learned that Hobbes saw human nature as a kind of biological machine, driven by self-preservation, survival, and quite a bit of selfishness. Meanwhile, Locke had a completely different take. He believed we're born as blank slates and shaped entirely by experience. So no instincts, no innate ideas, just learning from the world around us. These ideas were groundbreaking, but for centuries, psychology was stuck in the world of philosophy. More thought experiments than actual experiments. That is, until one man changed everything. Wilhelm Wundt. Now, if you've ever heard him called the father of modern psychology, there's a reason for that. In 1879, Wundt set up the very first experimental psychology lab, officially kicking off psychology as a real scientific discipline. Wilhelm Wundt was born in 1832 in Germany, at a time when psychology wasn't even its own thing yet. Back then, it was just a branch of philosophy, full of really deep questions, but not a lot of hard evidence. Wundt started out studying medicine and earned a degree in physiology, which gave him a strong foundation in how the body, and more importantly, the brain works. This background shaped his approach to psychology, blending biology, philosophy, and hands-on experiments. He was especially interested in perception and reaction times, basically, how quickly the mind processes information and responds to the world around it. But his real breakthrough came when he became a professor at the University of Leipzig. In 1879, he did something no one had done before. He founded the world's first psychology lab. This wasn't just some classroom with a few books. It was a full-blown research facility dedicated to studying the mind through experiments. That moment officially separated psychology from philosophy and turned it into a science. So, what exactly did Wundt study? Unlike the philosophers before, he wasn't interested in vague, abstract ideas about human nature. He wanted real data. He was asking a bold new question. How does the mind actually work? And more importantly, how can we measure it scientifically? As I said before Wundt, psychology was mostly guesswork. Philosophers would sit around, think about how the mind might work, and call it a day. No experiments, no data, just theories. So Wundt flipped the script. He brought psychology into the lab, applying the same scientific rigor that physicists and chemists use. His big idea behind it was that mental processes aren't just abstract thoughts. We can actually measure them, just like we measure physical reactions. So think back to the whole materialism thing. To prove it, he developed reaction time experiments. He'd present a stimulus, like a sound or a flash of light, and measure how long it took people to respond. Simple, but for that time, revolutionary. This was one of the first real attempts to study cognition scientifically, paving the way for research on perception, attention, and decision-making. His lab in Leipzig became the place for psychological research. Students came from all over the world to learn from him, including G. Stanley Hall, the guy who later introduced experimental psychology to the United States. One of Wundt's biggest contributions was structuralism. The idea that human consciousness isn't just one big mysterious thing, but something that can be broken down into basic elements, kind of like how a molecule is made of atoms. To study this, he used a method called introspection. And that sounds fancy and all, but the idea was pretty straightforward. He just trained participants to carefully observe and describe their own thoughts and sensations in response to specific stimuli. For example, they might listen to a metronome and report exactly what they were experiencing at that moment, what they felt, what they noticed, and how it changed over time. At the time, it was a groundbreaking step toward studying the mind with actual structured methods instead of just speculation. It laid the foundation for the scientific study of consciousness, even if later psychologists moved in a different direction. But Wundt didn't just stop at structuralism. He also introduced the concept of voluntarism. And the big idea behind that was that consciousness isn't just a passive sponge soaking up whatever happens around us. Instead, it's an active process shaped by our attention and will. In other words, we don't experience the world as it is. We organize and interpret everything we see, hear, and feel. Our minds choose what to focus on, what to ignore, and how to make sense of it all. Wundt wasn't just building on old ideas. He was directly responding to philosophers like Hobbes and Locke. They had theories about the mind, sure, but Wundt wanted more than theories. He wanted evidence. Hobbes thought of the mind as a kind of machine, but Wundt took that idea and tested it, measuring how fast people react to different stimuli. Locke believed we learn everything through experience. Wundt took that further by designing controlled experiments to see exactly how experience shapes perception. Unlike both, Wundt argued that consciousness has structure and that mental processes can actually be broken down and studied piece by piece, leading to structuralism. He also pushed back against Descartes' idea of dualism, the belief that the mind and body are completely separate. Wundt showed that mental processes aren't just abstract thoughts floating around. They can be studied, measured, and even linked to physiological changes. In that way, he helped lay the foundation for modern neuroscience. Wundt's laboratory at Leipzig became the training ground for the first generation of psychologists, many of whom went to start major schools of thought with their own research. Wundt believed that mental processes are linked to physiological functions was in some sense the very first start of neuroscience. Wilhelm Wundt didn't just study psychology, he transformed it. Before him, psychology was more philosophy than science, but in 1879, when he founded the first ever psychology lab, everything changed. That moment marked the birth of modern psychological research. Sure, some of his methods, like introspection, have been left behind in favor of more objective techniques, but his influence is everywhere. Experimental psychology, cognitive science, neuroscience, they all trace back to Wundt's belief that the human mind can be studied with real scientific methods. And that's his biggest legacy. He proved that psychology isn't just about ideas and theories, it's a science. Thanks for watching.